In my whole career, I've never seen anything like this.
Nobody in the room expected Princess Anne to be the one who broke the silence. The meeting had begun as a tightly controlled gathering of senior royals. Yet within minutes, the Princess Royal pushed back her chair, looked directly toward Prince Harry, and delivered two devastating words: "Not anymore." Then came the revelation. Anne exposed a private agreement Harry had been pursuing, an arrangement that could have quietly restored privileged access to selected royal properties and family briefings. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had called the Windsor meeting to settle questions that had remained unresolved for too long. William sat nearby with Catherine, while Camilla, Edward, Sophie, Anne, and Harry completed the senior family circle. The Princess Royal, a title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, had arrived prepared to listen. Instead, she became the person who forced the issue into the open. Harry had been pursuing what advisors privately called a three-part family access arrangement: limited use of a Windsor residence during UK visits, advance notice of selected family occasions, and a direct private communication channel with the king's household outside normal staff procedures. Anne placed the substance of that arrangement before everyone. She stated plainly that Harry had negotiated it through an intermediary without first informing William or the wider senior household. More damaging still, Charles had been considering whether some parts could be approved. Harry stiffened immediately. He did not look ashamed. He looked betrayed. Turning toward Anne, he asked why she had chosen to expose something he considered private, rather than speaking to him alone. The princess did not retreat. She answered that once private access began touching institutional privilege, it stopped being only a family matter. Charles remained silent. The king placed one hand over the folder in front of him but did not open it. William noticed. That small movement told the prince something words had not. His father already knew far more than he had admitted. Catherine saw the change in her husband's expression, and she understood that the tension had shifted. Harry was no longer the only person under scrutiny. Anne then explained the line she believed could not be crossed. She had no objection to Harry seeing his family. Her concern was that a former senior working royal could not quietly regain benefits tied to royal status without clear boundaries. Sophie watched Harry's expression change when the princess mentioned one specific clause: advance notification of private royal gatherings. That provision, Anne said, was where reconciliation began to look like privileged access. William finally turned toward Charles. The room went still. "How long have you known?" Anne had exposed the deal, but the king's silence was about to reveal why Harry believed such an arrangement might have been possible in the first place. Harry did not look frightened. He looked furious. That distinction mattered, because he had never understood distance from royal duty as distance from his family. He wanted a door left open without stepping back into the old system. William saw danger in that idea immediately. To the future king, every exception created a precedent, and every precedent could eventually become an expectation. Between them stood Charles, caught between the institution he led and the son he feared losing again. Harry insisted that his request had been misunderstood. The proposed arrangement, he said, was never designed to restore his former status. It was meant to give him a predictable way to see his father and extended family during visits to Britain without reopening the question of official duties. A royal residence in this context meant a property used by members of the family under crown or household arrangements rather than an ordinary private home. Harry argued that structure would reduce conflict. William heard something else: access, advance information, staff coordination, and accommodation connected to royal property all carried institutional meaning whether anyone wanted them to or not. Harry's voice hardened as the room stayed silent. He told them he had never asked to become a working royal again. He wanted something smaller, something that stopped every visit from becoming a negotiation. Charles watched his younger son closely, but the king did not interrupt. Harry then used the word that changed the mood completely: humiliation. He said being forced to renegotiate basic family contact each time made him feel as though he had to apply for permission to belong. William answered without raising his voice. He told Harry the problem was not seeing Charles. The problem was building a private route around boundaries that had already been established after his departure from senior royal life. Catherine watched the exchange tighten and noticed Harry gripping the back of his chair instead of sitting. She quietly asked him to sit down. He looked at her, hesitated, and remained standing. The refusal was small, but Catherine understood it immediately. Harry was not ready to soften. Anne then clarified something crucial. Charles had never given final approval, but the discussions had gone far enough for specific logistical wording to be drafted. Harry, therefore, had reason to believe the proposal was still alive. William turned toward his father again. Camilla did the same. The Queen Consort realized in that instant that the prince had never been briefed. Charles finally admitted why. The king said he had deliberately delayed involving William because he feared his elder son would reject the idea before Harry had the chance to explain it personally. That confession changed the balance of the room. Anne did not let the silence settle. She said this dispute had not begun here. It had begun weeks earlier, during one private family occasion when Harry made a request that changed everything. And once that earlier request came into focus, Anne's intervention no longer looked sudden. It looked inevitable. Weeks before Anne said not anymore, there had been no confrontation, no raised voices, and no senior staff watching. There had only been a private family dinner at Clarence's house, and one deceptively simple request. Harry asked his father whether future visits could be handled family to family, rather than through formal palace channels. Charles heard a son asking for dignity. Others would later hear something far more complicated. Harry had arrived for a short UK visit, determined to avoid old arguments. Clarence's house, the King's London residence and working base outside Buckingham Palace, gave the dinner a more personal setting than an official meeting would have. Charles kept the conversation away from public disputes, and for a time the evening felt warmer than either man had expected. Harry spoke about family. The king listened. Neither wanted another encounter reduced to lawyers, schedules, or staff messages. Harry raised the practical problem near the end of the evening. Every future visit, he said, seemed to involve separate discussions about security, accommodation, household approval, and who could be told in advance. He told Charles that trying to see his own family felt increasingly bureaucratic. Then came the request that changed everything. Harry asked for one permanent private liaison inside the king's household who could coordinate his visits, arrange access to an available royal residence, and notify him about relevant private family gatherings without every request passing through William's future household team. Charles did not agree outright. The king simply told his son, "I'll look at what can be done." Harry heard those words as a genuine opening. For him, it felt like his father was finally acknowledging that their relationship should not be governed entirely through offices and protocols. Charles believed he had offered reassurance, not a permanent framework. That difference in interpretation would soon become explosive. Anne reacted very differently when she later learned that the request had developed into drafted terms. She told Edward privately that affection had begun producing administrative privilege, even though nobody may have intended that result. The princess was not objecting to reconciliation. She was objecting to what reconciliation was becoming. Anne confronted Charles soon afterward. She placed the draft between them and tapped the clause concerning advance notification of private gatherings. The king read it twice, removed his glasses, and admitted quietly that the wording went further than he remembered authorizing. Then came the detail that hardened her position completely. Harry's intermediary had sought language designed to make the arrangement dependable, even if household structures changed in the future. Anne understood the implication immediately. A father could make a personal accommodation for his son, but an arrangement expected to survive into William's future household was no longer merely personal. Anne made her decision. The matter would not remain between Charles and Harry. William had to be included. By the time everyone entered Windsor, She already knew exactly which sentence she intended to stop, and Harry had no idea she was about to say it to his face. Harry had endured criticism before, but this was different. There were no cameras to blame, no newspaper headlines to attack, and no anonymous voices hiding behind palace walls. His aunt was standing only feet away, challenging him directly in front of the people whose approval mattered most. Anne did not question whether he loved his father. She questioned whether that love entitled him to a permanent royal exception. Harry's answer transformed the meeting from procedural disagreement into something painfully personal. Anne made the distinction as clearly as she could. Harry could visit Charles privately whenever the king wished. That was family. What concerned her was converting that welcome into guaranteed access managed through a special household route. A royal household, in this context, meant the staff and administrative structure supporting the monarch's official and private duties. Harry argued that nothing about his circumstances was ordinary. Every return to Britain, he said, became a test involving status, security, press attention, and protocol. To him, predictability was not privilege, it was protection from another round of uncertainty. Harry stepped closer to the table and looked directly at Anne. "Do you actually want me outside this family?" The question landed harder than any accusation before it. The princess held his gaze. "No. I want the family kept separate from the institution when separation matters." Harry's expression changed immediately. He heard the distinction, but he also heard rejection beneath it. Harry told her that people inside palace walls could talk calmly about boundaries because they had never needed to wonder whether those boundaries would shut them out completely. Anne's anger faded into something more wounded. She reminded him that nobody in the room was asking him to surrender his relationship with Charles. What she could not accept was an arrangement created quietly now and inherited by everyone later. Personal affection, she said, could not become a permanent obligation for a future household that had never agreed to it. William then asked the question that shifted the argument again. Had Harry personally requested the wording that could extend beyond Charles's reign? Harry said no. He insisted that his representative had been seeking long-term predictability, not authority over William's future arrangements. The admission mattered. The deal had grown beyond the emotional request made at Clarence House. But Harry refused to abandon it completely. He still believed some guaranteed structure was necessary. Charles finally cut across both of them. The king told Anne and Harry to stop speaking about him as though he were absent. His voice stayed low, but everyone stopped. Charles admitted that he had encouraged the talks because he feared losing his younger son again. Then William turned toward his father. "Did you actually have the authority to promise any of this?" That question changed everything. The conflict was no longer only about hurt, family, or reconciliation. It was now about power. And power was where the arrangement became most dangerous. Charles wore the crown, but even the crown could not solve the contradiction sitting before him. As a father, he could welcome Harry. As sovereign, he could instruct his own household. But he could not permanently dictate how William would organize a future reign. Suddenly Anne's objection became painfully clear. The secret deal was not threatening the monarchy because Harry wanted too much. It was threatening it because one clause quietly reached beyond Charles himself. Charles understood the distinction better than anyone in the room. His household meant the network of staff, residences, access rules, and private procedures operating under his authority as the current monarch. William's future household would belong to a different reign, with different responsibilities and different boundaries. A promise made by the king today could shape what happened while he remained sovereign, but it could not automatically command how the next monarch would organize his family or official life. Anne pushed that point firmly. She told Charles that the rule protected everyone, not only William. Without it, emotional promises made during one reign could become obligations forced onto the next. The king slowly closed the draft agreement and placed his pen beside it. For the first time, he looked less defensive than exhausted. He said he had never intended to bind his elder son. Anne believed him. But intention, she reminded him, did not erase the wording already sitting on the page. Harry heard something far more painful. He told his father that this was exactly what he had feared from the beginning. If every welcome depended entirely on whoever held power at a given moment, then nothing was secure. His desire for permanence, he insisted, had not come from ambition, it came from insecurity. Charles listened closely, and Harry made sure he understood the difference. William did not dismiss that fear. He told his brother that private family contact would never require a permanent constitutional-style guarantee. But the prince also drew his own line. Permanence was precisely what transformed kindness into entitlement. He would not promise automatic residence access, protected communication channels, or advance notification of private gatherings under a future reign. Harry could have a relationship with the family. William would not make institutional privilege hereditary across reigns. Edward finally offered the path nobody had wanted to confront. The original idea could survive, but only in a simpler form. Private invitations could continue, family contact could remain open, accommodation could be considered case by case. What could not survive were automatic privileges and protected channels. Anne then revealed that she had already suggested exactly that solution to Charles. The king had delayed because accepting it meant admitting Harry's preferred arrangement could never exist as drafted. Charles looked at his younger son, then at William. He had nowhere left to hide. The decision had to be made now, in front of everyone. And when the king finally gave his answer, the consequences would be immediate, because one chair at Windsor was about to be left empty. Charles did not shout. He did not condemn his son. He simply said the arrangement could not proceed as drafted. For Harry, the restraint made the rejection worse. The deal had represented something larger than accommodation or briefings. It had represented certainty. Now that certainty disappeared in a single sentence. Harry pushed his chair back, looked at his father, and walked toward the door before anyone in the room could decide whether stopping him would help or humiliate him. Charles made the boundary official. Private family invitations could continue, but guaranteed residence access, advance notification of gatherings, and the dedicated communication route would not. Those privileges were tied too closely to the working royal structure, the system of official duties, staff support, residences, and access attached to active service on behalf of the crown. William backed the decision, but he was careful with his words. The prince said this was not punishment. Harry could still see his family. What could not return was a special mechanism that blurred private affection with institutional entitlement. Harry stopped before leaving completely and turned back toward Charles. He asked whether his father had ever truly intended to approve the agreement. The king hesitated, then admitted that he had wanted to approve enough of it to reassure his son. He had delayed confronting the clauses he knew he could not responsibly guarantee. Harry's anger faded almost immediately. Disappointment replaced it. He said quietly that he wished Charles had told him that, before allowing the arrangement to become something everyone else could debate. Anne felt the force of that sentence. She remained convinced the deal had to be exposed, but certainty no longer looked like victory. Sophie noticed her watching the doorway after Harry left. The princess did not defend herself. She simply stayed silent, staring toward the place where her nephew had disappeared. Sophie understood what Anne was feeling. Stopping the arrangement had been necessary. Hurting Harry had never been the objective. Charles began to rise. William touched the edge of the table and spoke softly. "Give him 1 minute." The king stopped. For a moment, the monarch looked less like the sovereign responsible for protecting institutional boundaries, and more like a father fighting the instinct to run after his son. He sat again, visibly torn. Catherine finally asked the question everyone was avoiding. Did Harry understand that the personal invitation remained open? Anne answered that intellectually, he probably did. Emotionally, however, he had just heard one word, no. Catherine looked toward William, and the prince understood exactly what she was thinking. Harry had not left Windsor. He had gone only as far as a smaller adjoining room, where he remained alone, without advisors or officials. One final chance still existed, for someone to reach him before pride hardened into another permanent fracture. The person who eventually walked through that door was not Charles. It was William. For the first time that day, the brothers would speak without staff, without documents, and without anyone else deciding what their words were supposed to mean. William entered without an aide and closed the door behind him. Harry did not stand. For several seconds, neither brother spoke. The confrontation they had avoided for years was suddenly stripped of titles, household structures, and carefully prepared arguments. William had opposed the deal. Harry knew it. But the prince had not come to repeat Anne's case. He had come to answer the question buried beneath every clause Harry had requested. Would there still be a place for him when Charles was gone? William spoke first and kept his voice low. He told Harry that his objection had never been to private family contact. The future reigned the period when William would eventually become sovereign and control his own household arrangements, was where the problem began. A personal invitation was one thing. A guaranteed right written into future systems was another. Harry listened without interrupting. Then he admitted that permanence had always been the point. Rebuilding trust with Charles meant something to him, but he feared that everything could disappear the moment circumstances changed. Harry finally asked the question he had avoided all day. When you're king, will I still be your brother before I'm a problem? William did not answer immediately. The silence stretched long enough to make Harry look away. Then the prince told him yes. He would always be his brother. But being his brother could never mean possessing guaranteed access to royal machinery, staff, residences, or information simply because their relationship was personal. Harry absorbed the distinction differently this time. He admitted that the negotiations had become more ambitious because certainty felt safer than trust. What began as a request for a predictable way to see family had slowly turned into clauses designed to remove every future uncertainty. For the first time, he accepted that the final wording had gone beyond what he originally asked Charles for. William did not celebrate the admission. He simply listened. William then offered something Harry had not expected. No contract, no protected clause, no institutional guarantee. The prince promised personally that genuine family matters would not require Harry to fight through layers of bureaucracy just to reach him. Even after circumstances changed, he would not treat his brother as a stranger simply because the structure around them was different. Harry did not ask for the rejected deal to be revived. Instead, he asked William to tell Anne that he understood why she had intervened, even if he still resented how publicly she had done it inside the family. The prince agreed. William opened the door, then paused. Harry stood. Instead of leaving Windsor, he followed his brother back toward the others. That decision became the turning point. Whatever the brothers said behind that closed door remained theirs. But Harry, returning to the room, could not stay private forever, and by the following morning, one newspaper image would turn the Windsor rupture into a national spectacle. By sunrise, two words dominated the royal conversation: not anymore. The private sentence Anne had delivered inside Windsor was suddenly being treated as a verdict on Harry's entire relationship with the monarchy. Yet the public story was harsher than what had actually happened. Harry had lost the secret arrangement, not his family. Anne had blocked institutional privilege, not personal contact. But once one dramatic headline reached the streets outside Buckingham Palace, nuance became almost impossible to recover. Palace staff moved quickly to contain the interpretation. Their response was deliberately narrow. Private family discussions would remain private, and no change had been made to Harry's formal status. Formal status, in this context, meant his official position within the royal structure, rather than whether relatives chose to see him personally. Senior aides understood the danger immediately. If the story hardened into a public expulsion, Anne would be blamed for severing a family bond. If it became a triumph over Harry, the deeper sadness behind the meeting would disappear. The headline made that balance almost impossible. One major morning newspaper carried Anne's stern portrait beneath the enormous words, "Not anymore," with a subheading declaring that a secret access proposal for Harry had been rejected after a dramatic Windsor confrontation. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered near the gates, while broadcasters argued over the meaning. Was Harry being denied reconciliation, or merely denied special treatment? Phones lifted every time a royal vehicle appeared, turning even ordinary movement into evidence of some new chapter. Anne saw the front page over breakfast and closed the newspaper before finishing the article. She had wanted to stop an arrangement that blurred private affection with future institutional rights. She had not wanted to become the public face of another family fracture. The princess remained convinced the boundary was necessary, but the headline stripped away every painful distinction she had tried to make. Harry reacted with anger when he learned how widely the story had spread. Yet he did something important. He did not publicly challenge the central outcome. He did not demand that the rejected agreement be revived. His silence carried its own message. The deal was finished. William acted just as carefully. He privately instructed staff not to brief against his brother and insisted that one distinction remain clear. Harry had no guaranteed institutional route, but nobody was being told to cut off personal family contact. Charles approved the same approach. The king rejected any effort to present Anne's intervention as a victory over his younger son. The public wanted a winner and a loser. Windsor could not afford either. One final decision remained: what the family itself would record about the meeting, and whether Harry would accept the new boundary without reopening the fight. Because the true verdict would not be found in a headline. It would be measured by who stayed, who accepted the limit, and who chose family without demanding privilege. There was no dramatic reversal. No hidden clause rescued the agreement. No last-minute intervention restored what Anne had exposed. Harry's secret deal was finished. Yet the deeper verdict was not the exile suggested by the headlines. By the end of the Windsor meeting, the monarchy had drawn a boundary everyone could understand. Family affection could survive separation from royal duty, but private affection could no longer be used to recreate privileges that resignation had surrendered. Harry returned to the meeting room and sat down. The final arrangement removed the permanent liaison, guaranteed royal residence access, automatic advance notification of selected gatherings, and any language intended to survive into William's future household. That future household meant the staff, residences, access rules, and official systems the prince would control during his own reign. Charles remained free to invite his younger son privately whenever he wished. William also accepted that future family relationships could not be dictated by today's conflict. Harry did not apologize for wanting security in his relationship with his family. He acknowledged something narrower but important. The draft had moved beyond what private reconciliation actually required. Anne answered with equal restraint. She told him she did not regret stopping the arrangement. But she did regret that he had learned the full force of her objection in front of the entire senior family. Harry looked toward his aunt and said he still believed she could have spoken to him first. Anne accepted that without defending herself. Neither pretended the hurt had disappeared. Charles finally reached across the table. The king told Harry that rejecting the agreement did not mean rejecting him. His son did not respond with a dramatic embrace or sudden forgiveness. He gave a small nod. That restraint carried more truth than any theatrical reconciliation could have done. Charles had finally stopped promising certainty he could not guarantee, while Harry had finally heard that the family door and the institutional door were not the same thing. William then made his own position final. He would not permit a permanent exemption from normal royal structures in a future reign. But the prince also refused the opposite extreme. Harry would not be treated as permanently excluded from private family life simply because he no longer held the same official role. The distinction that had caused the crisis became the principle that resolved it. Anne's "not anymore" therefore meant something far more precise than the headlines suggested. It did not mean Harry no longer belonged to the family. It meant the era of unresolved ambiguity was over. Choices carried boundaries, and those boundaries would no longer be softened through private arrangements nobody else understood. Harry left Windsor without the certainty he had tried to secure on paper. What remained was harder, more fragile, and perhaps more meaningful. Personal assurances dependent on relationships rather than entitlement. Nobody truly won. Anne protected the institution. William protected the future crown. Charles preserved the possibility of family. Harry accepted that belonging and royal privilege were no longer the same thing. The secret deal ended permanently. The family door did not. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.